Leading a resistance movement is hard enough on its own. Now imagine doing it when every ally you counted on has abandoned you. When 72 men are all that stand between you and an empire's army. That was the reality Hussain ibn Ali faced at Karbala. Hey everyone, I am Ali, and in this video I want to critically analyze the resistance movement led by Hussain ibn Ali, not as a religious story, as a political one. Because when you strip away the emotion, what you find is a masterclass in moral leadership and a cautionary tale about the limits of military resistance. Let's get into it. First, some background. After the death of the Prophet, the Islamic State operated on a certain set of political norms. Leadership was tied to consent, consultation, and legitimacy. That changed with Yazid ibn Muawiya. When his father Muawiya ibn Abi Sufyan died, Yazid inherited power, not through election, not through consensus, through inheritance. This was effectively the first dictatorship in the history of Islamic State. Hussain ibn Ali, the Prophet's grandson, refused to accept it, and so a resistance movement began. Now, here is where it gets interesting. What was the actual goal of his movement? Was it to overthrow Yazid? Was it to march on Damascus and seize power? Or was it something else entirely? I want to argue it was something else. But we will get back to that. First, let's look at why the movement failed militarily. Hussein received thousands of letters of support from Kufa. People were pledging their support. They were ready to fight. So he moved towards Kufa. But here is what happened while he was on the road. The Umayyad governor Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad got there first. He used two tools, brutal suppression and direct bribery, to dismantle the Kufan resistance from the inside. By the time Hussein reached Karbala, the support base had evaporated. He wasn't walking into a mass uprising, he was walking into a trap. The Umayyads controlled the roads, the communication routes, and the treasury. They isolated his group completely, and they framed the whole situation to the outside world as a minor internal rebellion, not a legitimate political challenge. That framing mattered a lot. The second factor was structural. Yazid had not just inherited a title, he had inherited a machine. His father Muawiyah had spent decades building the Syrian army, the most disciplined, most loyal military force in the region. That army was not going anywhere. Compare this to the earlier civil wars, where the political landscape was fragmented and alliances were constantly shifting. By the time of Karbala, the Umayyad power base was solid, and there was one more factor working against Hussein: war fatigue. Many Muslims across the empire had genuine moral sympathy for him. They respected him, they loved him, but they were exhausted. The first fitna, the earlier civil war, had left deep scars. People did not want to go back to that chaos, so they stayed home. And that collective hesitation handed the Umayyad state a monopoly on violence, with almost no immediate resistance. Now let's ask an interesting hypothetical question. What if Hussein had retreated to a region with better geography, somewhere like Yemen or Tabuk, with its mountains and loyal tribal networks? It is a fair question. A mountainous base would have given him strong defensive terrain. It could have turned the movement into a long term sustainable insurgency. But here is the problem with that strategy. Moving to the periphery means giving up the center. It means the challenge to Yazid's legitimacy becomes a regional footnote rather than a central political crisis. And it still does not solve the core problem. The Umayyads controlled the money, the army, and the infrastructure of an entire empire. Better geography could have prevented the immediate tragedy at Karbala, but it probably would not have brought down the dynasty. So let's come back to the original question. Was Hussein's goal to overthrow Yazid? I don't think so. His goal was to set a precedent. Think about it in this way: a constitution means nothing if no one is willing to defend it in a moment of crisis. Laws mean nothing if powerful men can simply ignore them without consequences. Hussein was making a statement. He was saying, this is what illegitimate power looks like, and this is what refusing to submit to it looks like. His father Ali ibn Abi Talib had set a precedent for how to handle a rebel who refuses to accept legitimate authority. Hussein set the precedent for the opposite scenario: what a citizen's obligations are when the authority itself becomes illegitimate. He became the living interpretation of political principles under the most extreme conditions. And here is the proof that his goal was achieved. The Umayyad dynasty eventually fell, not because of a military defeat at Karbala. Hussein lost that battle decisively, but because Karbala created a permanent crack in the Umayyad claim to legitimacy. That crack never healed. It widened with every generation, and eventually it brought the dynasty down. Husayn ibn Ali is remembered 14 centuries later. Yazid is remembered only as a footnote to what Hussein chose to do. This is not the outcome of a failed resistance. So, to summarize, Hussein's movement failed militarily because of three things: the collapse of Kufan support, the structural strength of the Umayyad state, and the war fatigue of the wider Muslim population. But militarily failing was never the point. The point was to draw a line, to make the injustice undeniable, to give future generations a reference point. And on that measure, he won completely.